Hi everybody, welcome back. So I think we've all seen just a crazy amount of new branded optics out there. It's not just the big ones anymore, the Trijicon, Aimpoint, Steiner, all that stuff. There are a ton of little brands, and we get hit up a lot here to test out optics. And generally I don't take on new optics unless it's from one of the larger companies, or unless I've seen my friends or other people out there in the community kind of run them and proof them a little bit, because you can waste a lot of time and energy. But a company called Arory got a hold of us and said that their newer micro red dot for a pistol was basically built as a competitor at a far cheaper price point than like the Holosun 507K, 407Ks, which have turned out to be extremely durable and very cost effective for most end users out there, to the point where some agencies, in fact several agencies, are actually issuing Holosun optics for duty pistols. So that intrigued me, and I figured, you know what, I'll bite. Let's test this thing out and see what happens. And this little version right here, which you can see we've already destroyed from drop testing. Yes, we're gonna do some of that cringe drop testing here. It's called the RMU1, again from Arory Optics. So we're gonna see if this $139 optic, if it's going to beat one of the most popular optics out there in the industry right now in the way of the Holosun 507K. But something that we know is gonna work out for you is a battle bottle. So make sure you get over to ironinfidel.com, get you a battle bottle, a tumbler. We got that EDC gear, the blades, the clothing, the fitness gear, everything right in one place at ironinfidel.com. All right, so we ran two Shadow Systems pistols, one a full size and one a micro or a slimline compact. We chose the XR920P and the CR920XP to run these on, and thank you to Shadow Systems for donating some pistols that we could basically destroy with drop testing. We really appreciate it. But we ran 500 rounds, 250 and 250, so each optic got an appropriate amount of rounds. Ran those pretty much non-stop to see how the optic is going to perform. The glass appeared very crisp and clear with the dot in there. It had good brightness settings. They zeroed up very nicely. Everything seemed to be good to go with all the basic shooting. It's got a large enough window for a micro style optic that was very good and forgiving when you came to drawing and presenting on target. So everything appeared to be good to go. It didn't have a lot of magnification, it didn't have a lot of color hue, and we'll talk more about hue and notch filters here in a minute. However, as far as the initial range testing and performance, everything seemed pretty good to go, so I figured why not go ahead and move into some drop testing. And for that drop testing, we used the full-size variant with a light on it to add more weight to the system for those direct impacts onto the optic itself. And we'll go ahead and roll that footage in right now and then kind of wrap it up afterwards. All right, so we're gonna do some drop testing. As much as you, me, and other people may think that drop testing is kind of cringe, right? It is a good idea to know that your optic can take a little bit of a dump on the ground and not break, die, lose zero, all those things. Using Shadow Systems XR920, the Foundation series. So this optic doesn't have a plate in it. It goes direct to slide. It may have a little bit of movement side to side, just to warn you, because the spacers for these aren't meant to be used with this, so it doesn't have the spacer to keep it super tight in there. But we're going to take a practice shot, make sure that we're still good on 0 from 25. We'll do some... That's what you call an absolute idiot out on the range. We'll do one practice shot from the 25, make sure 0's on, do a drop test, do a couple shots, make sure everything's good to go. All right, so I can see my impact is dead center. We'll go ahead, unload, make sure the trigger's blank. Now this is pretty hard compacted Arizona dirt right on the optic. Took a nice little chunk off the top there. Okay, we're still good on 0. Okay, about that far below my first hit, so we know we're still zeroed. Right next to the one I just fired, still good. Again, right there. Let's find something a little harder. All right, so we found a nice piece of range trash, little shot up stainless steel water bottle. We're gonna use that to drop it on now. Get that optic smashed right into the metal. There's a good one. They're still right on. All right, so we found something a little harder. We're gonna use steel target this time. Our shroud is pretty jacked up, but our glass is still intact. Nothing's broke on this thing so far. It's maintained 0. So we'll go ahead, extremely unforgiving plate of steel, and just drop this pistol. We still got a dot, that's good. It looks like we've lost 0. So our dot might have shifted due to the lack of a spacer. Let's see if I can just ram it back. Yeah, so the dot's way off. Iron sights are still on. And I can actually see in here where it's moved. So that's due to the mounting interface, not necessarily the optic itself. Still got a dot. Looks like we do have our first little crack in the glass. The very upper right corner, you can just barely see the glass has cracked. Yeah, that's 2 more drops on steel. Crack hasn't spread yet. Oh, dude, look at this optic housing, how deformed that is. And the glass still really hasn't cracked anymore. That's pretty crazy. All right, that's it. There it went. The glass finally came out. And it looks like I broke one of the fasteners probably. We will wrap up all the drop testing discussion in a second, but let's talk about the specs when it comes to the RMU1. So this seems to have all the specs we are looking for. It's made of 7075 aluminum, a 3000 G shock testing, IPX7 waterproof rating, shake awake technology, a multi-reticle. You can either have dot or circle dot, the donut of death, 12 brightness settings with 2 NV settings on there if you're into the nightlife, a lifetime no questions asked warranty. They do come with a Glock adapter plate for the MOS system if you want to run this micro dot on a full-size Glock. They come with a ton of different screws to fit all the most popular pistols out there, an adjustment tool, 2 batteries, a lens cloth, and of course the manuals. As far as battery life goes, it's a little bit lower than some other people market, right? And I know the whole 50,000 hours thing is really not a true number, but this says on setting about 7, you're going to get around 2,000 hours of battery life on just the dot. And then if you use the circle and the dot on setting 7, you get about 700 hours, and the lower you go, the higher it gets. So it does seem a little bit lower than some other advertised optics out there, but I think all of us understand that the 50,000 hour battery life thing is not really a setting. Basically, if you don't know how they calculate that 50,000 hours, they crank the optic way past the limit of which you would ever be able to use it for, and they do a mathematical calculation based on how much battery drain that optic is giving from the LED emitter. So it's not like somebody is sitting there for 50,000 hours just staring at a dot. So you may get more hours than others, you may get less than some, but those are the advertised hours that they put out. Now let's talk about the glass and the hue or the notch filter and the different colors. So this has a very clear view, and generally when you see very clear glass on a projected emitter red dot, you see less battery life out of it. So things like the RMR and some other optics that have a really defined like bluish hue or a darker hue or a higher notch filter, that helps the LED emitter on that glass use less power. So it's kind of a good thing because it prolongs the battery life. But if you don't like weird odd colored glass, which really doesn't matter when you're using the thing, you don't notice it, that could be an issue. So the way to remember that is basically usually the more hueing on the glass, the longer the battery life, and usually if it's super clear, you're going to get less battery life. There are very few exceptions to that rule. However, this one does have multi-coating on it, but you might see a little bit less battery life, which is pretty much what they say in their manual. Now, bringing this back around to those drop testing results, honestly, I'm extremely shocked, because at 139 bucks, I really wasn't expecting much. It seems to be, however, though, recently some of these smaller companies putting out newer optics are extremely durable, to the point where this one, the optic didn't actually break and shift. The screws into the shadow system actually bent while the optic was on it, likely due to the fact that there isn't a shim spacer for that full-size shadow system to run the micro dot. But I knew that was going to happen. I talked about that up front in the testing. However, the screws gave way before the optic gave way, and then eventually we did break the glass out of it. Although it did not shatter, the glass just kind of came out and pushed forward. Again, we'll show that, and that came from multiple drop tests, as you saw, both on the hard compacted Arizona dirt and then onto a stainless steel water bottle that was left out here by someone who's trashy. And then we ended up finally just banging the heck out of it onto a steel plate. I'm 6'4", holding it like this. That was a long way down with the additional weight of a full-size pistol and a full-size light in the way of the Streamlight TLR1. I'm pretty shocked. For the most part, it maintained zero until I had to push the optic back over. Again, that's due to the fact that there's no lug or recoil lug engagement for the optic on that pistol slide. It's just free floated with some screws, and eventually the screws gave way before the optic. Long term, don't know what this optic is going to do. That's why I didn't destroy the other one, so I can keep running it. However, for 139 bucks, I am absolutely pretty impressed with how this thing held up. Now, while this isn't a definitive scientific test, right, it's more redneck science, what we would do out here in the desert, it seemed to fare pretty well. At $139, the RMU1 from Arory seems to be like a solid option. I'm sure there are more people that are going to do the same kind of thing to this, so make sure you take in that content as well, because I've got two. Maybe somebody else has one that doesn't fare as well. However, I think these results kind of speak for themselves, which again kind of shocked me for a $139 optic. I'm used to running a lot of more expensive stuff, I guess you could say. Make sure you get subscribed to the channel. Get over to ironinfidel.com. Check out the battle bottles, the tumblers, the fitness gear, the EDC gear, and we'll see you guys on the next one.